Hello, this is Graphic Policy Radio. This is Elon 11. I am your perpetual host, but I have a special guest host coming for you guys tonight because folks have been asking me a lot when I'm going to get around to covering the Hawkeye series on Disney Plus. And would you believe I haven't watched it yet? But coming to the rescue is frequent guest and collaborator John Arminio. He has a whole episode for you right now with two fabulous returning graphic policy guests, where they'll be talking about the Hawkeye comics by David Asia and Matt Fraction, as well as the popular TV series. And I didn't have to lift a finger. So please share a warm welcome to our guest host, John Arminio, and our first string guests talking about our favorite second string Avenger. And I'll be back with you soon.
Greetings, pizza connoisseurs and archery aficionados. This is Graphic Policy Radio, a comics podcast that remembers some of the very first villains superheroes fought against were predatory landlords and the capitalist structures that support them. I am your guest host, John Arminio. Your regular host, Elon 11, graciously let me the space to talk about comic books after I just wouldn't stop babbling on social media about how much I love these Hawkeye stories. So I want to extend my gratitude to her and everyone at Graphic Policy for the opportunity to talk comics with some great guests. Speaking of which, joining me are two wonderful people who agreed to do me this great favor of being on this podcast with me. First, Scott Thorough is a Brooklyn-born social worker currently based in Baltimore. He's a brilliant musician and podcaster and can be heard on the Zebras in America podcast with co-host Marcus Pinn.
Hi, Doug.
Hi, Doug. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. And Kat Overland is the small press editor at the two-time Eisner-winning WWAC, Women Write About Comics, where she also writes criticism, reviews, and tweets. She also has bylines at Shelf Dust, Daily Beast, Comics MNT, and more. A mid-30s Latina in D.C., in non-pandemic times, you can find her cosplaying as America Chavez and buying old Generation X comics at conventions. Currently, you can hear them on Untitled Talkies podcast discussing Gundam Wing and the history of fandom on the internet. Welcome, Kat.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be back at Graphic Policy for another episode.
Wait, you have a Gundam podcast?
I do have a Gundam Wing. It's just Gundam Wing.
Oh my god, I know that's like Gundam Wing is like when I was. Sorry, John. When I was a high school dropout, mm-hmm. I looked forward to every day when Gundam Wing was going to be on Toonami. Me and my best friend would just like, do stuff that teenagers did, and then talk about like how awesome the show was. And then when we would go to Manhattan to like anime stores and like manga stores, we would be told like that's not like the real Gundam. I'm like, y'all don't get it. It is, and it's awesome. I can't wait. I can't wait to listen to your podcast. What's
awesome! I hope you like it, and I'd also recommend Mechanations. We've retweeted them a couple times. It's like a overall Gundam podcast.
Yeah, I'm a weirdo. I like three mech things. I like Foolie Cooley, Evangelion, and Gundam Wing. I'm simple like that. What can I say?
Giant space robots. What's not to love?
And existentialism and the gray areas of war. I'm sorry, I derailed already, but that's what I sort of do.
I assume you're gonna like edit our asides, right? Or do these just go straight?
This is staying in the episode.
Okay. Cool.
But the reason we're here, I mean, we could just talk about Japanese space robots and existentialism for an hour, but the reason we're here is because of pretty much the Hawkeye streaming series on Disney Plus, and I do like it, and I certainly don't want to trash it or anything. That's not what we're here for. It just, for me, couldn't compete with the sort of medium expanding brilliance of the 2012 Hawkeye run, and usually referred to as the Matt Fraction David Aja run, but also has significant contributions from Annie Wu, Francisco Francavilla, Javier Pulido, colorist Matt Hollingsworth, and letterer Chris Elopoulos. And obviously the show does have some issues with properly crediting the source material here, especially as Alan Heinberg and Jim Chung created the character Kate Bishop, and they get a nice royalty-free special thanks in the credits.
Yeah, and David Aja definitely tweeted, so we know he was not even given the perfunctory $5,000 check that they sent Ed Brubaker for Winter Soldier, which, to me, like, yeah, take that money, but, like, kind of a slap in the face.
Yeah, like, especially for superhero books, nothing, at least before this time, looked like or read like this Hawkeye series.
Yeah.
It's pretty perfunctory to call it groundbreaking, but yeah, David deserves so much credit for that.
Yeah, I mean, you can't really talk about the great mid-aughts and tens Marvel and the good Marvel stuff without... You can't do it without Brubaker. You can't do it without Fraction. You also can't do it without Bendis, but really Fraction and Brubaker were just hitting it out of the park. And the art of Aja with this, I mean, I have so many thoughts, but I get so excited. Thank you for having me. I'm fanning out.
Awesome. Well, Scott, when did you first encounter this Hawkeye run? Do you remember?
I do. I was very obsessed with, in the early aughts, I reconnected with the big two comic books mostly through the three major Marvel young person books. You had the Runaways, where the children of villains trying to save the world and grow into their own. And then you had Kyle and Yost's work on the X-Men, where we got X-23, Hellion, a contextualization of the Cuckoos, Dust, Elixir, Prodigy, who's like super awesome, and just like recontextualizing Marvel as the X-Men characters as kids and what kids with like super duper powers could do. And then there was the New Avengers, which just Young Avengers, excuse me, not the New Avengers, not to be confused. The Young Avengers, for which we were introduced to Kate Bishop and my favorite Captain America character, the Patriot. You had, like some of the greatest characters. And then I took a little hiatus from comic books. And then I was at a party and my friend Jake from Ridgewood was like, dude, this Hawkeye run is wild. You have to check it out. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, this isn't going to be good. Like, Hawkeye's like just like this dude. Like, I guess he was cool in the Thunderbolts, but like, what is his deal? He's like good at hitting things, and like, he's kind of like Daredevil, but with purple. And he was like, nah, dude, just trust me, you're gonna love it. And then I picked it up and immediately was caught by the artwork and yeah, my favorite city comic book stories have the city as one of the main characters. Like, why is Gotham PD like one of the best comic books of the past 30 years? Because the main character is Gotham. And when you have, like, Ex Machina was so good because the main character is really the beating heart of the city. The neighborhoods and the characters of the city in this run mixed with the psychedelic and experimental expositions of the drawing, the writing, and the storytelling, plus doing like everything that like Garth Ennis tried to do with his run on Punisher, but like not like a sociopath. Like just blew me out of the way. And rereading it this month and crying, literally. Also, I've had a rough month, but just like crying. And good comic books, good media does that to you. And I'm sure we'll go into the reasons why, but yeah, I was so good.
I'd never thought about the Punisher as that sort of Garth Ennis connective tissue to Matt Fraction, but that actually makes a lot of sense because his Warzone stuff.
Exactly.
And I'm sure we're going to get into this, but I also love how this series has that New York, Brooklyn as a character, then just effortlessly shifts to an LA book.
Absolutely.
For several issues. And yeah, who can do a New York and an LA book at the same time?
And correctly and stylistically. Yeah. Like, you have this Beach Boys story in LA that feels like super what you might find in some of the cooler parts of The Invisibles by Grant Morrison on their run, and then you like, yeah, it's just it's tone perfect.
Yeah. And Kat, what about you? How did you first encounter this Hawkeye?
Pretty similar. I read comics growing up because my dad is a big comic fan, and I was really like to the teen, like the Jeff Johns Teen Titans was like my book in high school.
Nice.
Beyond some of the indie stuff that I was reading because I was really pretentious. But I took a break in college because I did not have the money to continue reading comics when my dad wasn't getting them. So I had read the Young Avengers stuff, and that's like a team that I love. But I was really excited to hear about the reboot because I'd already gotten into like Wictive and stuff. Around that time, I was able to like pay for comics again. Like I had a job in grad school that could like afforded some luxuries. So I got back into it and I started reading the Gillian McKelvey run on Young Avengers and was immediately obsessed with America Chavez and her flirtations with Kate Bishop. Like you heard, I do a fandom podcast, so I am like a shipper, but as a Latina and a queer one, America Chavez was fucking phenomenal. Like it was just so cool. She was so cool. She instantly had that amazing aesthetic. And so I started cosplaying her, and that's kind of how I got into the Hawkeye series, because I was already really invested in these characters and Kate Bishop, and was reading comics regularly enough to get like recommendations. This is a few years before I joined Women Write About Comics, so I was still not as plugged into like the comics internet at the time, I guess. But yeah, so I started reading it and it was just so phenomenal. And the more I was getting into comics, the more my friends were asking me for recommendations. So this would always be the go-to recommendation too. I think it also sort of coincided with a new comic book shop in Washington, D.C. So like I have a lot of really fond memories of the time period of that run and my time in comics.
And where's that store in D.C.? I just moved to Baltimore, but I'm always trying to find new spots.
Well, Third Eye in Baltimore is amazing. But Phantom Comics was a hangout. That's actually where I met my partner at a Halloween party. So, and we independently were cosplaying Kate and America. So, sort of worked out.
Perfect.
But yeah, Phantom's in DuPont, and there's
great.
also Big Planet in DC. That's on like U Street, but there's also one in College Park.
Oh, wonderful! Thank you. I'm just starting to go into the world again, and it's really important for me to, I got into a very nice, I got into a nice conversation with John when I was preparing for the episode, where I was like, hey, like, do you have a recommendation for like where I can, download this to read on my tablet? And then I realized I was saying this to someone who works at a brick and mortar comic book store. So John has been working at a brick and mortar comic store for a long time and been doing so during the pandemic. And then he was a sweetheart and a mensch about it. But then I was like, you know what? That was whack. So then like I didn't know about the store that you just mentioned. So I just went to Atomic Books and was like, do you have Hawkeye? And they were like, yes. And then I accidentally spent $200 on books. And I felt really great because I was, putting cash into the neighborhood for brick and mortar stores that aren't run by supervillains.
That is like the most capitalistic benefit of the pandemic is like you can really justify a lot of those small purchases. Like, oh, I'm supporting them. I need more comics.
Right. I feel really good about spending $100 at a store that's been making sure that their workers have jobs and like following safety protocols. I feel really good about it. And even though like I'm super lefty, I have to exist in the world that I exist in. Mm-hmm. But because I believe that we should abolish rent, there are parts of this story that I really like that I'm just giving a little foreshadow of,
Yeah.
Well, Scott, it's absolutely no worries. You're the mensch. But I think that what you're talking about is exactly why I think any sort of local bookstore of any kind is kind of magical, is that you can just get lost for hours and find books that you may never get to in your lifetime, but just make you excited to read anything.
It was kind of actually a bonus of getting to recommend comics, because I think really the 2010s had a sort of resurgence in more mainstream media covering stuff, especially with the really popular image books at the time. So more people were like, Kenneth, you like comics. So I got to introduce them to like a really good comic and a cool store, like a cool community. So.
And I think what is really special about this Hawkeye run is that whether you are new to comics or have been reading comics all your life, I think there's something to the story and to the way it's presented that can really hook you. Like, it's something like if it communicates so viscerally to the reader that somebody who's not familiar with the way comics read are not going to get confused with the way, like, to read the panels, because I know that's a barrier for some people. They just don't know like where to go or where to put their eye on the page. But I don't think there's ever a point we were confused about where to look in this book. But I think if you've been reading comics for 50 years, you can look at it and be like, wow, the cartooning technique in this thing is amazing.
Oh yeah,
that's a really fascinating point that I don't think I really ever considered when I was recommending it, is that it's like so beloved by comics people because of that high level technique, right? And the sort of like pushing the boundaries of what we're doing with like the graphic narrative going on and action sequences especially, but like the visual literacy that you might need for some other comics is not necessarily required. That's really fascinating. Sorry if I just restated your point. I'm just like really fascinated by this.
It rewards you whether you're new to the medium or whether you've interacted with the medium. And I think the best art is intersectional in that way, where if you can either just like rip it to shreds as a new person, or also just understand the subtext and understand like the little nods and see the things, because like I love the Art Deco, Art Nouveau vibes. And, you know, I love that it's got this noir sense, but it also has these issues that almost remind me of like Chris Ware, who like, who's like one of the great visual storytellers of our time. Jimmy Corrigan is like, if you want to cry, it's just one of the great graphic novels ever made. I said it. It's like a movie, and that sequential style is done here. And I want to jump to a bunch of stuff, but John, do you want to help us sort of say what is this story?
Yeah, sure. This run of Hawkeye is really about what Clint Barton does when he's not an Avenger. Clint Barton, it's sort of a goofy premise for a superhero. He's really good at archery. Like Green Arrow, but without the billions of dollars and more personality issues. But it really gets to the heart, in my opinion, about, how much of a hero he is and how much he tries to do the right thing and how plain his sense of morality is. Like, he clearly knows what the right thing to do is when it comes to other people's lives. Sometimes his own actions fall short of what we would want. When it comes to his interpersonal relationships, at least. But he really puts his life and his body on the line for people that he doesn't even know. And that's really, compelling in a hero like this. So, I'll open the floor. What do you think makes Clint a hero in this book?
Oh, I was going to say, I love this book because Clint kind of sucks. And he's a hero.
Yes.
It's sort of that dichotomy that he's just a guy just trying to do his best, but maybe not always trying his, he's trying his best, but maybe what he's doing is not always the best thing. But he just keeps going. I guess, I think that's kind of the theme of the book, right? In some ways, that continuation. Like
Right.
the fact that he continues.
Yeah, he's this guy who can make any shot with a bow and arrow, but he can't even pour himself a cup of coffee without spilling it. So he just drinks out of the jug.
And he's a mess, and he's not really good at interpersonal relationships. Like another New York character that's good at fighting, Daredevil, he's not a great boyfriend, and he is just feels guilty about the mistakes that he's made, and he's a character that's been around for a very long time, almost like a combination of like Green Arrow and the Grayson family, and like bad guy turned good guy, and
I was a little bit of Peter Parker.
oh yeah.
The Barton look definitely is a thing here.
Right, and lots of retcons, and by the time this has happened, he was destroyed. He was killed by Wanda Maximoff in Avengers Disassembled. He was brought back to life in House of M. He was going around in the Ronin suit for a long time before Echo became Ronin, and then he found out that Kate Bishop was under the guise of Hawkeye, and then he took his bow back, and then she was like, "Nah, son, give me that." And she took it back, and then they are both Hawkeye. So by the time you're having this dichotomy, you have like Hawkeye, who's just like, who am I? Am I a shitty person? But like, I love dogs. I found out that the predatory landlord is going to take advantage of the people that live in my house. And even though I don't really like them all that much, I also kind of love them and don't want them to be homeless.
Right.
And
they're the only people who can stand me and maybe like me. So
right. And
yeah. Yeah, it's sort of like his mantle had already been passed. So it was a really interesting time to really focus on him as a character, too, after all of this.
And I love that he has passed on the mantle, but he's, at least at this point in his life and in his story, he's over being jealous of Kate Bishop. Like, in issue like 2 or 3, he looks at her and be like, this is Kate Bishop. I love everything about her. She's great. Look at how magnificent she is. And so I love entering this story admiring Kate Bishop as much as Clint does. And
right.
Is it okay to pivot to the show a little?
Sure.
Just because I really liked the show, and I really liked Haley Stanfield. Like, she was an amazing Kate, and she really embodied the character very well. But like, what I'm still not over, even though I think it was definitely one of the top tier Marvel shows, is sort of how they took that away. The way they sort of came at it, maybe not as equals, but she had already been superheroing, maybe a little. You know, she had already started off on her own.
In the comic book.
Yeah, in the comic book. So it was like he's sort of mentoring her, but she's also mentoring him back. And he respects her for that. Like, he understands that. And it feels a little too one-sided, even with how great Kate is on the show, for me.
I agree.
And it really kind of diminishes what I loved about this relationship. It puts them on unequal footing. It
diminishes a lot by not having Kate already. I agree with you. Because Kate established as this badass, like, smart talking, real person who's just like really good at shit and intelligent and sardonic and knows her worth and is going into this world. But you know, the Hawkeye in the Marvel Cinematic Universe is really way more based off of the Ultimates version of Hawkeye. And a lot of the early characterizations were sort of mingling with the Ultimate character. And the Ultimate Hawkeye is not that interesting and just tragic. Yeah. And like
really tragic. I honestly kept waiting for them to pull some of that into the MCU, but I guess the MCU is a little too nice.
Right, because the Ultimate Universe, for which a lot of the early characterizations, some they pick and choose, in the MCU, the Hawkeye is closer to that one, and his family have a very terrible fate at the hands of, I believe, Black Widow and her squad of the Anti-Ultimates.
Yep.
You know, going back to it, I'm going to say it. I think the Ultimates is kind of overrated. How many times do we have to present like superheroes as like shitty, toxic people when in reality, like most superheroes, the non-alternate versions are like when you look at them and contextualize them and look at it. When I try to unpack these characters from my, sorry, I'm putting on my nerd hat, my like anarcho-communist leanings, none of these characters work for me as like people. They're all incredibly flawed, but so I don't need like this thing where like, we're going to do Captain America, but he's terrible. Like, I already, which is ironic because I think the Captain America characters are like some of the most that I mess with because of their view of like their idealization of politics or whatever. But sorry, I got into word soup. I got so excited, and that's what we miss in that dyad between the characters in the show.
Yeah. I think, man, and MCU Clint really had an uphill battle, I think, because they were pulling so heavily from Ultimates, and he didn't really have anything to do until Avengers, and then it's like, hey, this super popular take on this character exploded, and so this is like the show in some ways is a really interesting experiment in seeing if you can reconcile all of these different characterizations, I think.
And yeah, I think it's also a function of the comic book industry, at least from my perspective, because I work in comics and I see new comics on the shelves every week. Like the Ultimate Universe at this point is just so like in the rear view. Like it's to me, it's ancient history. And the only even remnant of it is the fact that Miles Morales is in the mainstream Marvel universe now, which is awesome.
I mean, like if you were going to save something.
Yes, save Miles. But it is sort of, troubling in the show to try and reconcile the Hawkeye we know from this comic with the Hawkeye we've seen in the MCU, because, during the snap in the MCU, he becomes Ronin and is like a serial killer. Right. He's just murdering people left and right with the sword because he's sad in the rain. But, everybody else on the planet has suffered the same loss as he did. And then he just sort of like casually regrets. He doesn't even sad
about it.
Yeah, it's not like he regrets what he did. He just doesn't want anybody else to find out about it. Really, in the show, it seems like.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like I like a character who sucks, but I don't like a character that sucks like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really I really like Kate Bishop's characterization in the MCU. I feel connected to her. I'm really excited to find out what's going on with her mom and their spoilers, how they reintroduced Kingpin into the MCU and the cast of characters, Swordmaster. When
oh my god.
Yeah, right. Okay, when we realized who Gills was, I actually texted John. I was like, I don't know if I can do this because I think one of the strongest. I mean, there's so many great episodes in this run, but there's an issue where Hawkeye helps one of his tenants, Grills, who calls him Hawkeye, not Hawkeye, help his dad with their house in the Far Rockaway before Hurricane Sandy comes.
Yeah, I was really thinking about that issue when I was watching it because it's just like we're never going to get that side. Like that's the part of the comic that they didn't seem that interested in integrating. Like they want the visual panache and some of that humor and charm, but maybe not so much the really in-depth emotional exploration.
Yeah, I don't think they do because they have the comedy of the Tracksuit Mafia, and even the Tracksuit Mafia are self-referential, where they make this joke where like, bro, are we the Royal Tenenbaums, bro, or like whatever, like but to not have that emotional depth, it's erasure of the things that we like about it, the human story, you know, and it's also the difference between him and, you know, a guy, if we're going to talk like Hal Jordan in the 90s, when his city gets destroyed, he becomes Parallax. I mean, eventually he gets retconned, but Hawkeye just like is like, he's a superhero who's like shot aliens with trick bows, but he's like, I'm going to help you board up stuff. And knowing that we're not going to have that story because this Clint Barton in the MCU just wouldn't be able to do that. We don't do that. And then, you know, when the character Clown just like wantonly kills this character, I was tearing up.
Yeah, it really hits hard.
Yeah, it's such an emotional moment and a tragedy because we've seen Clint bond with that character, and so we're able to bond with him too. And that is something really difficult in comics as somebody who has to sell comics to customers. Any new character is difficult to sell to people, and for us to just, you know, fall in love with this guy who calls him Hawkeye, like he's such an adorable character, and to lose him so brutally and in a non-exploitative way, you know, it's such a compelling read. And, you know, instead of turning into Parallax, Clint is a guy who, at the risk of his own body and soul, tries harder or gets less sleep. And yeah, I wish we could have, or, you know, seen him try and fail to hook up his AV cables so his neighbors can watch a Christmas special.
Right, and those are the little things that just change the difference between like something special and something that's just like regular.
Comics critic and writer Cheryl Lynn Eaton talks on Twitter a lot about like the differences between your like Avengers-sized heroes, like Captain America-sized heroes, and your street-level heroes, and how you can utilize those street-level heroes to tell like more of those allegorical stories or ones that are sort of tied more to the real world, and how this. And as I was sort of prepping for this podcast, I was really thinking about how Fraction and Aja et al. Use Hawkeye as a street-level hero, like really world outside your window, like your shitty landlord won't fix your house and is gonna try to sell it to some developers kind of stuff through the superhero lens. And yeah, it's sort of like... It just wasn't ever going to translate to the MCU, but It sort of feels like worse than that. Like, I'm just going to keep bringing it up that they're not paying anybody, except I think Matt Fraction got pulled on as consultant, but not because like Marvel hired him straight off the bat as a consultant. Like he got pulled in because he knew somebody.
Yeah. And I mean, even like the credit sequence is pulled straight from the comic. Like, I don't think any of the graphic designers who worked for Marvel in 2012 got paid for Disney stealing that logo.
Right. And like the purple chevron, like that's so iconic. Yeah. And I know it's work for hire, but it's just like, y'all have the money for this.
Yeah.
And if you're gonna sort of like kind of sand it all down, the least you could do is pay the people that did the work to make it popular enough for you to have a Hawkeye show.
Especially in a comic where the villains are malevolent developers who are trying to bulldoze and flatten out this neighborhood.
Right. It sucked to lose that plot line.
Yeah.
Like, it was sort of like, okay, I like this, but Hawkeye really felt a lot more now urgent, rooted in the real world in that sense. And it did a good job of really like, why would this dude be in the Avengers if he's just some guy? But it really also hammered home that he is some guy. Like, I really liked that. Both of those lenses on Clint Barton are correct.
Right. He's just some guy. He's also, like, mad nice with weapons. Mm-hmm. The scene where we were introduced to Grills made me laugh because of an inside joke with my friends, because he goes to like a Ren fair where there's this also LARPing, and he's looking for the Ronin costume, and this guy has the Ronin costume, and he's like, look, if you just let me kill you and let me look good in the LARP, I'll give it to you. But, and like Hawkeye's going around like just killing everybody with the foam swords. And it reminds me of a story of one of my friends growing up. Him and his brother did Kali fighting, which is like a Filipino martial art with sticks.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
It's super awesome. And one time they were just walking in a park and they saw some people doing some LARP stuff, and they were like, "Hey, do you guys want to be in our LARP fight? We need 2 people." But then they got really mad because they were just like really nice. They were really good at sword fighting. They've been doing this martial art, and they were just like killing everybody. And it was this kind of fun thing, and it was something that just like brought me a lot of joy. And I think something that makes these comics really human is, I remember when Luke Cage joined the new Avengers, his thing was, I will join the Avengers if, when we're not saving the world, we're helping out neighborhoods, we're handing out turkeys, we're being part of the neighborhood. So I hope that maybe, since they're clearly bringing back some of the Netflix characters, that maybe they can, revisit Luke Cage and sort of piecemeal this idea of the human side of the neighborhoods and the characters and the family connections. And I wonder how they'll deal with Clint's brother, who plays a big part in the run.
I feel like they're probably, like, I don't know. I feel like Clint's got so many people in the MCU already. And that sort of also is interesting because Hawkeye, the comic, is very much about all of these lingering historical connections that he's had versus the show where it's like, I don't know, I never really felt that connected to Clint being a family man. Can't say that really ever did anything for me. My secret headcanon has always been that Clint Barton's family in the MCU are life model decoys that Fury set up to like keep him happy and compliant, but that's just me.
That's not
I do love
Linda.
I love Linda Cardinelli, so I'm glad she got some stuff to do, but I think it really just, like, obviously it changes the character, but it shifted it so much to me from him being like searching for roots and connection amongst like the people that live in his building, like that are his community members, not just like cops that he's working with. And like his ghosts of ex-girlfriends past and how he could like repair, or maybe not repair, but like going back to those sort of relationships. And like, I don't know, they try to build like this sort of history between him and his wife, and it didn't really do much for me.
Right, like that she was in S.H.I.E.L.D. and
yeah, like that was cool, but she still just was on the phone.
Yeah, a lot of sad wife on the phone scenes for a actress who's too talented for that.
Right. I'm like, okay, you better let her do some really cool shit if this gets... I'm wondering if I doubt they're going to bring Bobby in from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., so part of me is wondering if she would be Mockingbird, but then they pulled in Kingpin, so who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the fact that his crew were not cops and were just people was like something that was very, I didn't realize.
Yeah, there
so
are.
Important.
Yeah, like there are no cops basically in the comic because cops are not interested in the plight of abused tenants.
Exactly, like the authoritarian systems have already failed all of them. They're very, like, it's street level. Problems.
They do not care about this stuff. And like gentrification, look, cops often are just the bodyguards of the rich, and gentrification helps rich people selling, that's the crux of good Daredevil comics. It's the crux of this comic. It's just that, why would they care?
Yeah.
They don't.
Kingpin is in the room with the people making these decisions, the worst person in New York. So that's the level of, authority or moral authority that Fraction Nahaj and Aja. Is it Aja or Aja? I'm sorry.
So he's from Spain. So technically it would be David Aja.
Okay.
But he said on Twitter, people pronounce it every which way, and he mostly just wants to get paid.
Okay. That's
I like.
I mean, he has
like,
not said anything churlish about Hawkeye or anything. I just
It's like, give me my money, and
as long as he's getting credited.
Yeah, and my favorite, one of my favorite Steely Dan albums is Aja. So Asia, whatever.
Okay.
Also, like, when we talk about the use of like different literary devices in the book, there's an issue that's just from the point of view of a dog.
Yes.
There's an issue that's in American Sign Language. There's this character Ghost. Like, what do y'all think of all that?
I mean, I really love all that stuff. I think, especially with the way the series plays with time, there are issues that kind of unfold backwards. There are issues where it references a moment from a previous issue, but from a different perspective. And so, especially in the Pizza Dog issue, you're going around and Lucky is sort of investigating everything going on in the building, and maybe
investigating a murder.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, and so you see things that happened in an earlier issue, but now from the Doctor's perspective, and in a later issue, you see these events from Barney's perspective, and so it just fills out the world in such a charming, funny, and unique way. Like it was just a masterstroke, in my opinion.
I love the specificity of all of it. Bringing in like ASL for that, but having it also be about Clint's relationship with his brother, who is now also just like disabled, works so well because all of it is really built up. You know what I mean? Like they laid the groundwork and really integrated his deafness into the storyline in a way that made it like that issue feel in some ways sort of inevitable. Like when you got there, you were like, yes. This is just another perspective that I already knew was continuing on, like you said, Scott, like, and John, like the temporal stuff and then the perspective shifts. I love that issue a lot, and I think it also sort of highlights how I don't feel like deafness was integrated quite naturally. Like, I mean, it's not like there has to be a narrative reason for him to be deaf.
Right.
And I don't mean that. I just mean like in the show, it felt like it was sort of used as a device. In the comic, it really felt like, yeah, okay, this makes sense because this is what happened. Like this is a a logical conclusion to what we saw in earlier issues.
Right. And that his brother is deaf, and then and then we are introduced to Echo, who's also deaf, and the handling of that. I hope the show gives that character the justice that Echo deserves.
Yeah, I think it's great that she's getting a spinoff because she's awesome.
She was so good. I just want more, and I want the complexities of the character.
Yeah, Alakwa Cox was great, and like she is a deaf actress, which is really cool. And I really liked that they integrated Clint's deafness into the MCU in a way that made a lot of sense. But it did sometimes feel like it's a plot element more so. It didn't feel gimmicky. It could have felt so gimmicky in this comic,
Yeah.
And it just, it felt like they really were respectful and laid down the groundwork and like artistically really integrated into it. It didn't feel like, okay, now we have to put this in because people are yelling at us on Twitter.
Yeah, and I think so much of the comic is a subjective viewpoint from Clint's perspective. So so much of it is his experience. And so when he loses his hearing, us as readers lose it as well. And we see him sort of pig-headedly, like, refuse help, refuse even to sign. He's, as helpless as he is sometimes as a human being, he's also somebody who has a really, really hard time asking for help, especially when he needs it. And so there's a great moment when he calls like his ex-girlfriend or his current girlfriend or a woman that he's broken or burned bridges with and asks for help. And he has to ask help for his brother. And, there's some wonderful moments of tragedy flashing back to their childhood where he needs Barney's help to survive that childhood. And so all that stuff just integrates into making, his deafness an integral part of the story and his character.
And also, I feel like childhood trauma is the superpower of a lot of male Marvel characters.
Sure.
Childhood trauma, Catholic guilt, pick it.
Dead parents.
Dead parents, a lot of character building. But
yeah, it never feels never feels overly manipulative,
Yeah. I mean, if you throw a rock in comic books, you'll hit a dozen tragic childhoods as origin stories. Mm-hmm. And so that is one of the reasons why I love characters like Kamala Khan and Miles Morales, because they just want to be good people. They don't need enormous tragedies in their childhood as formative experiences. They're just like, well, I've inherited these powers in some wacky fashion, and so I'm going to help people with it. And I think that's cool.
I also think the brilliance of like third generation, fourth generation, fifth generation storytelling of comic books as we've accepted the mythology and like other characters take on the mantles of things. It's just you get to have better, more interesting versions of stuff. Like Miles Morales in this day and age just makes sense as who Spider-Man would be. When Dick Grayson became Batman for a little bit, it just made more sense, and he was a much better Batman because he was a much better person. And just like, and so when you have, characters like America Chavez or Patriot, or just like people acknowledging the pasts, but also being like, this is who we are. So even when like someone tries to have a bad faith argument with me about diversity in comic books, I'm like, dude, like you're wrong, because if you're saying that you don't want your comic books to be political, then you're already making your statement. You're proving your statement, because if you're representing a New York City, it's not going to be 5 white dudes, two white women, and 1 black person. That's just not what New York City looks like. That's not what the world looks like. So, like, having representation and characters that are interesting, even though which is not so much the case in Hawkeye, which is about 2, mostly cishet white people. But
well, so I actually that's like Haley Steinfeld is part Asian, part Filipino, I believe.
I didn't know.
And I was really surprised that Disney did not go ahead and lean into that. It's weird if you notice, Haley Steinfeld is wearing blue contacts in the show, and it's apparently because they cast 2 like blue-eyed actors as their parents, even though her father, spoilers, gets blown up in like the first 15 minutes. So I get that maybe they're trying to seed something, but it was very surprising to me, especially now as it seems like the MCU is gearing up to really focus on these later gen heroes, that they wouldn't take that opportunity to make Kate Bishop actually like mixed and Asian. I know a lot of fans had been fan casting her and reading her as canonically Asian for a long time. So I was disappointed in that. I mean, like, not her performance, obviously, but it's just surprising they wouldn't take the diversity check when they could have easily done it.
I was not aware of that, so thank you.
Yeah, I didn't even know that. Thank you for learning me. Wow.
But while we're talking about Kate, let's talk about her sojourn into Los Angeles, the LA Woman story. When I first read this, it was probably 2015, I think. But, just one of the immediate things that immediately grabbed a hold of me was just, I'm a huge movie nerd, and to find Elliot Gould make initially a cameo, but then this character modeled after him played a pretty integral part into the story, just tickled me to no end. But also just Kate on her own, turning her life into her own sort of trash fire, but also trying to do good, putting her life on the line to get an orchid for her neighbor's wedding. Like, all that stuff is fantastic to me. She's eminently charming, makes friends with animals the same way Clint does. It's just a great, fun LA story.
I love Kate, and I love how fun she is. She's just like a really fun character, and this book was just so fun. The art is so fun. Hollingsworth's colors are amazing, and I love Annie Wu's Kate so much.
What's going on with her right now in the comic books? Like, what's her vibe? What's she doing?
She has a solo that I think they finally managed to synchronize a solo to go with a show at the same time. Big steps. I haven't picked it up yet, though. It seems generally well received. I was really into her in West Coast Avengers.
Yeah, and the Kelly Thompson West Coast Avengers and Hawkeye stuff is fantastic.
Yeah. So that could be fun. Like, I am really wondering if they're going to bring in the Madame Mask stuff, though. It would be awesome. So fun to see like the next season take place on the West Coast, and they could bring in like a whole different aesthetic and stuff. But again, it would feel like, stop making me feel conflicted about this. Like, I hate it. Disney, just pay them. Like,
just pay the people.
Cool. But yeah, I don't know. Madame Mask is like that whole storyline. I did not guess it. I think it was a really good mystery.
Yeah, she's an exceptionally creepy villain, and I think you get a lot of menace out of her that you don't get from a lot of... I guess you could categorize her as a B-grade villain. Mm-hmm. She's certainly not a Doctor Doom, but her motivations and her actions and her malevolence are just such on her own weird wavelength. This whole story about, spoilers again, about like peddling LMDs to Los Angeles people obsessed with being young. That's incredibly creepy. So yeah, again, another movie reference, but if that interests you, the movie Seconds is amazing. So she's just such a great adversary for somebody like Kate, who's so earnest and so honest. So for somebody whose whole thing is subterfuge and masks and, alternate bodies, I think it just works perfectly.
And it's like very clever thematically in a series where I think it's very much about finding out what being, in some ways, being Hawkeye and being you is all about.
Yes, exactly.
And yeah, so okay, and I'm just wondering, I feel like they with the MCU, I think they should just sort of do what they're doing instead of like trying to build another gigantic thing. They did just have like these TV shows where we're meeting the characters, and then if we connect with them, opening up. I feel sort of silly. I didn't even connect that clown was in the show for some reason, because he was so underwhelming in the show and so creepy in the comic book.
Yeah, he's terrifying in the comic book. You see him in one panel and you never forget it.
Yeah. The noir influences there, especially in the AHA art, the shading and like the shading, so good. Mm-hmm. I really love that. And sort of, when I think about the book's design and stuff, I also think very much like Saul Bass.
Yeah.
That influence there too, that plays out. They're just like, the synthesis there is so good between Fraction and AHA. I think it's very hard for me to be like the influence of one or the other,
Very symbiotic. And also I think if I'm not mistaken, wasn't Brubaker and Bendis, Michael, they were both like crime comic writers. And
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
so when they really knocked it out of the park when they took on superheroes. Like they figured it out. Sometimes people do not translate well. You know, I love Star Trek and I love Michael Chabon, but his handling of the first season of Picard didn't really work for me. He understood the characters perfectly, but the season overarched like a book, and a TV is not a book, you know. And when Jonathan Lethem wrote, I think it was Omni-Man, wrote a short note. No, that's not the character. He did a Marvel book, and it, you know, sometimes it doesn't translate all the time. So they really figured it out, that they were able to do everything that people thought Frank Miller did, but actually never was good at any of it. Or like,
You are coming out swinging on this podcast.
well, what am I supposed to do? Oh no, what else did I say? Am I going to get people mad at me on the internet?
Uh-oh.
Do you think a comic like this could come out today in this? 'Cause we're talking about this and sort of like the serialization of comics. I think it really, really, really benefited from having a tight first trade. And they were able to really play on that sequential stuff. So I wonder about that. You don't really see books get up to like 5 trades for a solo title these days.
Yeah, the only title that has gone that long in recent memory is Immortal Hulk, which was phenomenal.
Miss Marvel keeps getting renumbered, right?
Yes, yeah. So
I'm looking forward to Miss Marvel. That's going to be rad.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to Miss Marvel finally making her way into the MCU. You know, you really have to be a publisher that trusts your creative team. And even if a title goes on for more than 12 or even 24 issues, it's rare that creative teams stay together. You know, they're switching around artists so often that, you know, this sort of cohesive storytelling just can't happen, unfortunately.
And it's so important to have that connection. I'm sorry, I think you were about to say something. I interrupted you.
Oh, no, I was going to say, having AHA be on all of those first issues really created, like, I mean, it's a signature look. It's so signature that Disney ripped it off. And even when they integrated other artists who put their own spin on things, I think many of them were sort of adhering to, like, what I think now we would think about as, like, a Hawkeye aesthetic. And sort of taking that cue from David Aja to really get creative with the action layouts or the paneling or even the colors, and like every issue are great. So all of the colorists really picking up on all those purple hues
and working in like I just love when they play with the medium, when they use different artists or probably right, but y'all remember when they brought back Prophet, the 90s comic, but they redid it starting at issue number 26, like for Image Comics a couple years ago.
Yeah.
And they just like rewrote it to make it make sense. But it was about different clones of the character, and each clone had a different artist writing it, different artist drawing it.
Oh, that's cool.
And it's one of the greatest sci-fi stories of the past 10 years. And I'm passionate, whether it be about how Frank Miller is overrated and how Ultimates really isn't that good, and that Prophet is wonderful. And I'm just like, I'm just excited when people tell new stories. I think when I was on Graphic Policy recently I think a year ago, to talk about Nocenti's run on Daredevil. And that run is so much more New York, so much more interesting to me than the Miller Daredevil stuff, which is probably Miller's best thing he did.
Yeah, I'm here for your passion and love for the medium, Scott. So thank you for bringing it. I appreciate it.
I don't know. At the time, it felt like, wow, comics are really taking off. They're taking risks, like Image is popping. Everything is great. And it doesn't really feel like the promise of books like Hawkeye have really been fulfilled across the board. I mean, I guess, like, I am a big X-Men fan. I've been writing a lot of X-Men reviews last year. So I'm sort of not. But that to me is sort of like a very unique situation. Mm-hmm. The X Office is kind of like its own thing.
I do think a lot of the DC mini and maxi series have been amazing. Mm-hmm. They're very self-consciously unshackled from continuity and the requirements of putting out a Batman book every week. So... like, I roll my eyes every time a new Batman miniseries comes out, but something like Batman the Imposter is amazing. Like, I've never seen a Bruce Wayne so conflicted with his own actions and so vulnerable in that series. The Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow from Tom King and Bill Evely is...
That art is amazing.
Like, yeah, that art... Yeah. Wow. Yeah, So both of those series aren't influenced by Hawkeye, I don't think, no. But there still is room in the industry for these really unique takes on these characters. Mm-hmm. I just think they have to come under the guise of, oh, this is separate. It's not regular comics anymore, which I think is unfortunate.
Yeah. Like, I can't think of a run that was so uninterrupted. It was sort of like other stuff was happening in the Marvel Universe that Hawkeye could be involved in, but it wasn't really spilling into the solo series.
I mean, we could talk about Squirrel Girl, which ran for 50-some issues, and I'll talk about that book for a year or so. But
that to me also feels very self-contained while still being part of the wider Marvel Universe,
Yeah.
Like, nothing about it was contradicting canon at the time, but that didn't mean it had to... like, all of this other stuff spills over. And didn't they have a pretty tight creative team, too?
Yeah. It was Ryan North and Erica Henderson for, like, the first 2/3, and then it was Derek Charm with Ryan North for the last third of the book.
Do you think he's going to get retconned again, Clint Barton? Do you think there will eventually be a comics version of reconciling the MCU version?
I mean, I hope not. Like... some of the fun of this book is his trash fire personal relationships, and the fact is he is a himbo. Women love looking at him. There's a couple scenes where he's taking his shirt off and, eyes ogle. But he can't, like, he also has a wandering eye and he can't keep it in his pants sometimes. Like, he's like a cute golden retriever. And that aspect of his character is something that, comics sort of need because you need to find ways to create interpersonal conflict and also not hate the character. And so he messes up just a little less than Matt Murdock, who might be the worst boyfriend in the Marvel Universe.
Pretty bad.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, he's definitely up there.
Yeah. And so, when you have a creative team as talented as, the crew that had him on this run, you're able to, like, turn his life into a shit pile, but also still root for him.
Is Francis Frank Avila still, like, is he finally coming back to draw some comics again?
He did a great couple issues on the Joker series, actually.
Oh.
Yeah, and... yeah, and his contributions to this series were fantastic because I'm a huge horror fan. So to see him could have sort of turned that lens on the clown was amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I have to see like
up to now.
No, the last big 2 books I read were Uncanny X-Force, when it was all the adamantium characters just like coming through, and Phantom X, and the Multiversity, and I think that's it. There was Avengers team that was run by Blue Marvel that I was reading for a while, but
Yeah, that was called
Oh,
The Ultimates.
I loved Alts too. That was so good.
That Ultimates, not
Al Ewing has been
Yeah.
pretty much kills any title he's on.
Yeah, it seems like
Now
he's a writer who, for some reason, is able to get away with doing very twisted versions on characters that we supposedly know really well. Ram V is and Saladin Ahmed are two guys who are like really hitting out of the park with like twisting characters. Yeah, Saladin Ahmed's Black Bolt from several years ago was just wow.
Yeah, that really was totally new insight for me on that character.
Yeah, him and Christian
much
Ward.
like Hawkeye was for me.
Yeah.
What were y'all's like Clint feelings before this book? Mine were nothing because I'm not really an Avengers person. So
yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I think I thought he was a purple archer, and I hadn't really read anything that was very compelling. Maybe that's my own fault, my own short-sightedness, but yeah, this is a book that really made me fall in love with the character.
Yeah, I liked Thunderbolts when it came out in the late 90s, and I liked when he died because I thought it was cool, and I was annoyed when he came back because I didn't want Kate Bishop to not be Hawkeye.
yeah,
So I was all right with it. And now they've created him as a character that is very interesting. And yeah, we'll see. I mean, I really haven't been keeping up with much comic books these days, except for I really like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comics that have been coming out for the past like 8 years.
IDW has been really killing it with those. They've been very consistent, very good.
They just really understood the characters and were able to do a thing that's very much its own thing and isn't unnecessarily violent or mean, but it makes sense and the characters do stuff and it's New York because I grew up in New York and I remember the New York that the Daredevil comics used to talk about, and I remember the New York that the Hawkeye comics talk about, and the fact that right now New York is very much like that in some places. There's the pandemic and there's like a hopelessness and nihilism in New York City right now that is very sad to see. So it can be,
So what makes a comic very New York? I'm from Houston. Nobody draws comics about that. So, although I was going to say, Scott, as an aside, have you read Sophie Campbell's Glory? Since you mentioned Prophet.
No, should I?
Yeah.
Okay.
Especially if you like her Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle comics.
I do. I just never heard of.
It's kind of the same thing as the Prophet one, where they they just started again, but now she's like this huge warrior alien buff lady. It's great.
This is awesome. This looks awesome. Sophie Campbell Glory.
Yeah.
Oh wow! This totally looks like right up my alley.
I love Sophie Campbell, but I've never read that, so I'll have to put that on my to-read list. Thank you.
Definitely.
Thank you.
But yeah, what
really,
makes...
if you can smell the sewer when reading the comic book, it's very New York. When you understand the writing, when you can sort of tell, like, the character, like the Tracksuit Mafia are a very caricatured version of a certain type of Eastern European person that lives in New York. But it comes from, like, I grew up with a lot of people from Eastern Europe who were first generationers moving to New York who talk like that. But again, not exactly like that. It's definitely a caricature, but when the characters, just talk about stuff, they talk about streets that actually exist. You could just, I guess that's a very good question. You can feel it in the coloring. You can feel it in the vibe. There's a scene where in No Senti's Daredevil where Kingpin is just playing tennis and talking about how he hates Christmas. And for some reason, you're like, this could only happen in New York.
Smell is
It's
a really
olfactory,
interesting
yeah.
point. It does feel like Hawkeye was a comic with like smells, like when he was all beat to shit after like days out in the rain. Like that dude looked like he smelled. I think Barney actually calls him out at one point.
Yeah, he's like drinking milk from a milk carton, and Barney says he smells. Or even in the opening issue when Clint's carrying Lucky soaking wet into the vet's office, you can smell that wet dog in that animal stank vet office. I totally agree. Well, on that charming image, do any of you have any final thoughts on this wonderful character-defining run on Hawkeye?
I feel like I should pick up one of the new Hawkeye title. Like I kind of lost track of Clint after I read Occupy Avengers, which is really unfortunately named, but a pretty okay book. I don't know. I hope that the show really encourages people to check out the sources, some of the different touchstones. I was saying to John before we started recording, I was checking out a Hawkeye book that Matt Fraction said was the reason, like he had read this book growing up and it was the reason that he was like, yeah, a Hawkeye book. So it was the Hawkeye solo series from 1983. And I have to look up his name again, sorry. Why is the Marvel website this way? By Mark Grunwald. So the Hawkeye solo series from 1983 by Mark Grunwald. He did the art and the writing. And I was actually really shocked at how much influence that it feels like there is. There's even like, it feels like there's some visual basis or some visual influence from this solo series to the David Aja one. So I think people should check it out. It's on Marvel Unlimited. I don't know that if there's a trade paperback of this 4-issue limited series. But if so, please buy it from your local comic book shop.
Scott, any last thoughts?
Thank you for having me. It is a pleasure to find, we and you have been talking about podcasting for a long time. Mm-hmm. And it was a pleasure to really break bread with both of you today. And check it out. And also go to a comic book store. The algorithm is fun and all, and there's a lot of cool stuff you can find on the internet, but a lot of us, our lives were changed because we went to a store and we found something by accident, or someone recommended us something cool, or you were looking for a book that was in the B section and something from the C section was in there for some reason, and you found it, and you're like, oh, let me find out this thing. So go to a comic book store and ask them, hey, is there something cool? And most people will be happy to help you. And if they're not, go to a different store, because we don't need gatekeeping nasty people. And also I think there's less of them maybe that we think about, and that angry people are much louder than enthusiastic and nice people.
I love when somebody who is new to comics comes into my store. I don't care what movie or show brought them in. If somebody doesn't even know how comics work, if they've never seen a Batman before, I'm into it. I want to educate people. It's wonderful.
See?
Yes.
And
if you're staying safe, my local shop will mail you stuff, so you can probably call them up.
Yes.
And chat.
Yeah, most stores will meet you outside, or do whatever feels comfortable for you. I live in Baltimore. It's all the comic book stores are mask on, unless they're serving food, and then they usually request a vaccine card. And if that's something that you're comfortable with eating, or give it a shot. If not, again, as they're saying, like, there's so much awesome. There's ways to do it, and the shipping on Amazon isn't even that good these days. Like it's the juice is not worth the squeeze. When these brick and mortar stores, if they close, they will not be reopened to be stores that are awesome. They won't. They will be real estate stores or cell phone stores or stuff that we don't need.
And
Do not get rid of the weirdos selling us cool stuff.
I'll be a
Sorry
weirdo for
interrupting you.
forever.
No.
But speaking of socio-political economics, if the tone of Hawkeye interests you, I cannot recommend highly enough the new series One Star Squadron by Mark Russell and Steve Lieber. It's the most insightful take on the gig economy I can remember reading, and it's about superheroes.
And Lieber also contributed to Hawkeye, right?
No, but he did work with Fraction on the Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen
Yeah, right.
book. That's amazing. That if you've listened to Graphic Policy for more than one episode, you probably heard Ilana talk about it.
He drew half an episode,
Okay.
half an issue.
Oh, all right.
Sorry, I pulled the books out and I was like, that's not Steve Lieber's name? It is. Okay.
Okay. Then
Sorry to interrupt.
What's the
appreciate
comic called again?
There's One Star Squadron by Mark Russell and Steve Lieber is the gig economy one, and then Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen is by Matt Fraction and Steve Lieber.
Oh, awesome. I'm going to have to check out. Yeah, that's a good
Definitely
thing.
I think, zany in the same way, but like more.
Yeah.
Okay.
But also
As Hawkeye.
also as heartfelt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are some...
A little more online, because
Right.
Hawkeye's not online.
Yeah, what are some other books that you would recommend to people that liked this, that want more like Hawkeye? That was a good segue.
Well, those books I just mentioned also, anything by Kelly Thompson where she tackles Kate Bishop or West Coast Avengers.
I loved The Seeds.
Oh,
I loved
yeah,
The
yeah,
Seeds by David Aja and Ann Nosetti. So, two names we talked a lot about today. So, it's very dystopic, but really cool. The art is predictably gorgeous. So,
Yeah, and if we're just doing the 6 Degrees of Separation, Matt Fraction did Sex Criminals with Chip Zdarsky, and if you like a really kind of groundbreaking take on a character, Chip Zdarsky's Howard the Duck is great. Another pretty zany but also very heartfelt superhero story.
it's really hard for me to think of like a comparable book off the top of my head, though.
Yeah.
It has like such a beautiful synthesis of writer and artist.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah, I was just being
Like,
selfish for, my own reasons for new stuff to read. Yeah.
Like, if you haven't read the Gillen McKelvey Young Avengers, I think it does some cool meta stuff.
I have. I'm a Young Avengers stan.
Yeah, you have. For the people out at home. But like cool twists on.
That's awesome. Oh, yeah.
The current Iron Man actually is great by Christopher Canwell. They found a way to take Tony Stark back to his basics. I know that's something that is kind of a cliche, but the way they do it, at least in the first couple trade paperbacks, it really, really works.
You mentioned Ram V earlier, and I would definitely say you should check out The Many Deaths of Layla Starr.
Oh,
if
God,
you
yeah.
love a book with good art.
Wow.
Like, if you are like a primarily art person and the art was really what drew you into Hawkeye, you should check this out. It's gorgeous. It's one of the most gorgeous comics I've read in a few years.
Yeah, that's has some Eisner winners in its future.
Yeah.
So, Kat, where can people find you online, and what do you want to promote?
You can find Kat Overland online at Dog Underwater, pretty much everywhere, but especially on Twitter. And please read womenwriteaboutcomics.com. We put out regular criticism. We have won 2 Eisners, and we have a very hard working editorial staff beyond just we edit. So you should check us out. So
Thank you.
And Scott, what do you want to promote?
Zebras in America podcast. We're on Twitter. We're on SoundCloud. We're taking a hiatus for a bit, but we hope to start production again very, very soon. You can find my music at scottthorough.com or Scott Thorough Bandcamp. I've been making music for 20 years, and if you choose to spend your time to check me out, I appreciate it. Thank you. And I respond to direct messages if you're polite. I don't owe anybody anything except to not be a shithead.
Please be polite.
Oh, my podcast just dropped a new episode for the new year. We're called Untitled Podcast, but you can Google us because I can't think of our social handles off the top of my head. They're all different.
Well, I want to thank both of you so much for doing this with me, this great conversation. It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. And I want to thank Ilana and Graphic Policy for letting me jibber-jabber about Hawkeye. And I want to thank anyone who's listening for making it to the end with us. It was such a joy. And as always, keep it geeky.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.